Hello, everybody. In this second weekend of June 26, there's only one story out here in Silicon Valley. Of course, it's the story of SpaceX's IPO. According to the Wall Street Journal, it proves the power of Elon Musk's superlative strategy. The Journal describes it as a Goldilocks debut. Very impressed. New York Times is, as the New York Times is typically, is slightly more ambivalent, but headline: SpaceX's unlikely journey from far-out idea to $2 trillion juggernaut. And of course, Keith Tier at That Was the Week, our weekly show on technology. Our summary also leads with the SpaceX IPO. He has a piece about Elon and the balloon Elon and the balloon, and then he says civilization needs him. He suggests that most commentators are grimacing at the valuation, the $2 trillion valuation, and the personal net worth of Elon Musk. Keith, I'm not so sure about that. Where's all this grimacing? Where's the evidence? I mean, as I said, the Journal is very impressed. Even the Times, in its own way, acknowledges Musk's remarkable financial success.
So do you use the internet at all, Andrew?
No, what is that? Haven't come across that one yet.
You should just scroll through X or Facebook or LinkedIn, and there's a huge pylon. That's PILE, second word on. About Elon's becoming a trillionaire and how disgusting it is, and the widening gap between the rich and the poor, and the fact that SpaceX lost $4 billion last year. How could it be worth this much money? It's everywhere, wall to wall, and very dominant.
Well, I haven't seen it, as I said. I mean, if you look at the Journal front page, and they're not always friendly to Musk.
This is you and media. This is you and media. You're looking at the
you troll the bathroom, Keith. You go into the rubbish dump. You're always going to find people who are upset for one reason. If it's not Elon, it's Bezos or Epstein or Trump or somebody else. So okay. So let's break it down. I mean, of course, you're right. A lot of people aren't particularly happy. There are a number of elements to what you call this grimace at the valuation. On the one hand, there's the fact that people don't like Elon. We'll come to that later. I know you're a big fan. Should people like him simply because, I mean, he clearly is an absolutely brilliant businessman. I mean, I don't think anyone could argue that.
I don't think it matters whether you like him.
Well, it does.
I'm not even sure I like him. You assess him, you analyze him.
Well, you admire him. I mean, that's how we approach the world. I mean, we make moral judgments on people, and that's how we make sense of the world, isn't it?
I think you judge him, and you judge him against a set of criteria. It's not an abstract judgment. It's your criteria really shapes your judgment. So if your criteria is as narrow as how much he's worth, you're going to have a particular view. And if your criteria is the future of civilization, you might have a different view.
Yeah, so, I mean, you've used this word before, Keith, civilization. I have to admit, I'm deeply ambivalent, but we'll come to that later. But there's no doubt that I mean, you're an expert on IPOs and venture. I mean, it's an absolutely brilliant maneuver. How has he done this? I mean, what narrative would you give? I mean, as the Times says, this unlikely journey, and of course that's Musk's journey from far out idea to $2 trillion juggernaut. The BBC has some images of what they call his stratospheric rise to trillionaire status. Back in 2020, he was the 35th richest person in the world. Now, of course, he's the richest man by quite a large margin. So how's he done this?
Well, let's ignore Tesla for a minute, and let's ignore Neuralink. Let's just focus on SpaceX. SpaceX is 25-ish years old. So it's a 2.5 decade long effort, and it started with a warehouse in El Segundo near LA, which is an area where there's a lot of rocket scientists, weirdly, who are skilled in the art. And he started playing with the idea of a reusable rocket. And little by little, he failed and he failed. He actually bet almost all of his gains from Tesla on SpaceX and almost lost it all. Then finally, a rocket worked. And since then, it's been iterative. The rockets got better and bigger and more reliable. The reusability was proven. The payloads that he puts into space now make SpaceX a virtual global monopoly on delivering payloads into space, satellites and the like, scientific equipment. And NASA now subcontracts to SpaceX for a lot of what NASA does. So it went from a warehouse in El Segundo to be a global monopoly in space. And then on top of that, he invented Starlink. And Starlink was thought to be impossible. There were satellite internet services before Starlink. I experimented with most of them, and they were very laggy. You couldn't do video calls on them, for example, because the latency was too much. And the bandwidth between Earth and space was unreliable. He perfected it to the point where Starlink now can sustain gigabit level connections pretty much everywhere in the world.
And even United are installing it, or supposed to be installing it on their plane. So in one sense, this is the classic story. This is a parable of a brilliant entrepreneur who had a crazy idea that no one else shared, and he stuck to it. He literally went for the stars, and he succeeded. Who would argue against that? I take your point, of course, that he isn't many people's most popular person. We'll come to that in a few minutes. But are there business people, startup people, who are suggesting that this doesn't reflect well on Musk?
No. It's wall-to-wall applause.
So there's no. So coming back to your editorial, there's no grimacing at that. I mean, on the one hand, he is the model of a brilliant, brave, obstinate entrepreneur who had a crazy idea that nobody else shared, and he stuck to it for many years, and then he became successful.
And he wasn't. The big thing is he wasn't afraid to raise very large amounts of money, and at least in an accounting sense, lose it, whilst building a very large, sustainable business that is still today losing money.
Is it? So coming back, so I take your point, and you and I always talk. This is one of your credos. Is SpaceX? What is its business? Is it satellite subscriptions? I mean, what's the long term of this business? What's the short term, the current nature of the business, and what's the vision?
So SpaceX is unprofitable, but it has segments that make a profit if you wall them off, like Starlink. Starlink is profitable. Its business is really multifold. In a space of about 6 weeks, it's gone from not being a player to being the third largest data center provider to AI, by doing deals with both Anthropic and Google for well over $1 billion a month in lease fees for the Colossus data centers that it built for Grok. It owns Grok. And so it has a data center business, and it's going to extend that into space using solar power to power orbiting data centers. So it has a data center business. Secondly, it has a space, a rocket building and leasing business that allows anyone who wants to get stuff into space to put it onto a SpaceX rocket. It's getting to the point where it wants to be able to build 4 rockets a week and have hundreds of rockets all over the Earth to be able to do up to 200 flights a month. And he thinks of that payload business a little bit like the airplane business, where you want, if an airplane had to be rebuilt every time it flew, you couldn't build a business. He wants that for space. And
so maybe we'll get eventually through SpaceX, we'll get Uber in space. You can catch a rocket to a nearby planet. So it's clearly on that level, it's remarkably impressive. There's a real business there. As you know, he loses money, but that doesn't really matter that much. All these great internet businesses began losing money, whether it's Google or Amazon. So there's that. So let's be clear. I agree with you that Elon Musk is a remarkable entrepreneur. And I don't know how many people would be grimacing at the valuation and the valuation. I mean, is $2 trillion absurd? Any more absurd than Anthropic or OpenAI's trillion or $2 trillion valuation when they do their IPOs later this year?
Look, I think all of these valuations, you can look at them in 2 ways. The first is you can look at current revenue and say, is it worth this much? And that's how most people think. Investors don't think like that.
Yeah, and you use something from Brad Gerstner, who compares the IPO price of companies like Nvidia, Apple, Google to today's price, and obviously dramatic rise. Although you could do it the other way. I mean, there are lots of companies that have failed, for better or worse.
Yeah, but this is the focus on winners, which we're trying to define the valuation of a winner when it first goes public as either rational or irrational. And if you look at that list from Brad Gerstner, it's clear in retrospect what seemed at the time like big valuations. For example, I didn't invest in most of these IPOs because I thought they were highly valued. Well, I was stupid because look at the gap between where they started and where they ended up.
You, Keith, stupid?
Exactly.
No.
Exactly. One learns through life. And so the valuation looked at from the point of view of what it will become is what's meaningful. And the idea that SpaceX will only be worth 2 trillion 10 or 20 years from now is probably wrong. It's probably going to worth a lot, many times that.
Right. I mean, I think it would be fair to say that it'll be worth a lot more, a lot less. It's not going to stay at 2 trillion. I think it was like Eric Schmidt's remark when he bought YouTube, that either it will be worth nothing or significantly many multiples more than the $1 billion that he paid. And of course it is. Okay, so we're agreeing on that. I don't think there's any debate. Remarkable entrepreneur, remarkable achievement. So when it comes to the implications, leaving Elon aside for the moment, the New York Times has a piece about wages falling, wealth surging. No wonder Americans are unhappy. And they point out, and this is also part of this week's news, that the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported this week that the surge in energy prices had wiped out 1.5 years of wage gains for the average American worker. So on the one hand, you have the end of wage gains for average American workers, and on the other hand, you have Elon being worth $1 trillion. Is that one of the areas, Keith, where people are grimacing? And don't they have a right to grimace at these very divergent numbers?
Look, I think the New York Times article is a bit of a red herring. It really relates to the Middle East conflict and the price of energy, and it's probably very temporary. I think there's a bigger framing that you could put that discussion in, which is the impact of AI on jobs, which interestingly enough, recent evidence suggests that those who say AI will create jobs, at least for now, look right. Jobs are growing, not shrinking. But there is a transformation, and transformation leads to unease. And if unease takes the form of less money in your pocket, which it often does,
for most people, according to the Times at least.
They
call it a stark juxtaposition. That's a very Times phrase. Stark juxtaposition.
Yeah, I think they used AI for that, probably.
I don't think they probably did, but they can think of that themselves. But isn't this stark, Keith? I mean, it's a reality, whether or not it in some ways maybe reflects the Middle Eastern crisis, maybe some of Trump's mismanagement.
Yeah, but it's not surprising, is it? I mean, whenever there is a spurt in wealth, you could think of it as the growth in GDP, the growth of value in the economy through whatever reason, it does exacerbate the gap between those who have the wealth and those who don't. So the wealth gap isn't recent. It's endemic. When was the time when there was no wealth gap? There is no such time, and it gets wider as wealth grows.
Well, but again, you
have to put.
I'm not sure if you've read the Times piece, but the Times acknowledges that, and I'm quoting them, inequality is hardly a new feature in America. You're absolutely right. But then they say the explosion of wealth at the very top is without precedent in U.S. history.
True.
At the height of the Gilded Age, at the end of the 19th century, the richest handful of Americans had a net worth equivalent of about 3% of the country's annual economic output. And now the fortunes of that same 20 individuals make up roughly 4 times a larger share. So it is 4 times more than the Gilded Age, which also shocked people. So that's a reality. You can't just dismiss it.
Well, you can't dismiss it, but if you're a social scientist, you have to contextualize it.
And you're a you got a PhD in social science from Kent, didn't you?
Exactly. I'm a doctor of the university. Andrew.
You're very wise. So tell us why the Times is wrong to talk about this.
It's always wrong to look back a very long time and then compare the ratios to the present as if there's a value judgment implied by the change. There's no value judgment. The change is just math. The wealth of the societies has grown massively, and you know the life of the average person has risen massively. You wouldn't have wanted to be a poor person in the Gilded Age compared to today.
Yeah, but historians would remind you that the Gilded Age ended with the First World War, and then the Great Depression, and then the New Deal. So the journey from the Gilded Age to more economic equality was a rocky, violent, problematic one. So it's not inevitable or straightforward.
Yeah, that's a bit of a side conversation, but the 20th.
No, why is that a side conversation? Well, I mean, that's what happened in history.
Well, because you're not wrong, but the 20th century was a century in which a leading empire, the UK, was eclipsed by others, and in order to be replaced, it required 2 world wars. The 20th century was the century of Britain's decline. It may look like the century of fascism, the rise of America, but actually the narrative at the core of it is Britain's decline and replacement by the US that took 2 world wars.
Well, some people might say, I don't know whether that's true or not, but some people might say that the story of the 21st century is the replacement of China. Well, that's the replacement of the United States by China, if that's how you look at history.
Yeah, before we get to the 21st century, just one last point on the 20th century. It was also the century of the greatest economic boom called the post-war boom, which speaks about the 1950s and 60s and early 70s, ever. And so that post-war boom led to, you know, all the things that you can look back at, the invention of home-based washing machines and dryers, ironing, you know, all the things that bring technology into the home and make domestic life easier. Women entering the workforce, votes for women. The progress of the 20th century that went alongside those terrible things is self-evident, and so today AI not only AI, but AI and many other technologies represent the modern form of the same thing. The pie is going to grow just as it did in the 20th century, and the pie is going to grow very fast, very big. The average life of the average person is going to get better and better and better, as it did in the 20th century, despite the two world wars. And Musk isn't, a problem. Musk is a symptom of that success.
Musk is a symptom in his wealth, in the fact that he's worth $1 trillion. I mean, my view on Musk is, if someone's going to be the first trillionaire, I don't think Musk is a particularly good pin-up for. I mean, he's, on the one hand, he's clearly a brilliant entrepreneur. On the other hand, as you say, even you don't particularly like him. His politics are very troubling. I mean, on the one hand, where he's reaching for the stars. The other news this week is that there were riots in Northern Ireland after with white supremacists, and Musk and his old friend Tommy Robinson, and a far-right activist in the UK, are orchestrating riots. So there's something weird. And NBC talks about Elon Musk for this week. So on the one hand, he makes $1 trillion from this brilliant IPO. On the other hand, he's under fire for stoking anti-immigrant riots in Belfast. One of the things that strikes me, hold on. One of the things that strikes me is this weird, the New York Times talks about radical juxtapositions or stark juxtaposition. That seems to be the starkest juxtaposition of Musk. On the one hand, he's reaching for the stars. On the other hand, he's stoking up racial animosity in Belfast.
I actually think that Musk is more of a man of a people in this context than you are. Musk doesn't sweep under the carpet that a Sikh tried to behead a local Irish person and almost killed him. Failed, luckily.
I don't know if it was a Sikh, was it?
It was a Sikh.
No, I think you're confusing that with what happened in Southampton. And anyway, whether or not it was a Sikh or not, that's not a generalization about all Sikhs.
There was an ethnic attack by an immigrant that led to locals objecting to the introduction into Belfast of cultural norms that are not normal in Belfast, and normal people, not racists. To call them racists is disgusting. Normal people who just don't like being attacked protested that there was no policing of what were asylum-seeking immigrants doing things on the streets that are not normal. And that's...
Is that civilization for you? Are they attacking civilization?
It absolutely is. The attack on civilization is coming from people who want to kill Jews in North London, for example. That is not wrong. I don't know what
that's got to do with Musk. But going back to Musk.
No, but Musk isn't wrong. Musk is taking the side of the common person in the face of events that are extreme and outrageous.
So I'm just quoting again NBC. Musk has recently voiced support for Restore Britain, a breakaway political party from Farage's Reform UK, which is pretty radical in its own sense, which felt its immigration policies were not extreme enough. Musk also regularly shares messages with Tommy Robinson. We've talked about him before, a far-right activist and convicted fraudster who has served 5 jail terms, very violent figure. So are you suggesting then, hold on, are you suggesting that there's no contradiction between Musk, the brilliant businessman, and Musk, the supporter of Tommy Robinson, that they're all...
Actually, I think here's how I think they're aligned. Musk, the businessman, is a logical, wants to get things right, science-based person. Musk, the social commentator, believes the Enlightenment and the gains of Western culture need to be protected, and sees especially Islamicists as medieval and a throwback to prior civilization.
Well, you're talking about Sikhs, they're not Muslims.
Well, I talked about one Sikh. Musk doesn't talk about Sikhs.
Yeah, I'm not sure we want to do.
Musk's belief system on immigration in Europe is becoming mainstream in Europe. I think the left are blind to the impact of anti-Western views on the streets of Western cities.
Well, you've put your political cards on the table, Keith. I wonder whether there was an interesting piece of news also from Switzerland this week, that Switzerland's voting on planning to cap its population at 10 million. These are clearly big issues in Europe and indeed in the US. So on the one hand, we've got these two, again, speaking of New York Times's juxtapositions, stark juxtapositions. The stark juxtaposition, leaving Musk out of it for the minute, in the world is, on the one hand, we have his SpaceX reaching for the stars, Uber in the sky, rockets being like cars. On the other hand, more and more scarcity on land. I mean, that's what the riots are about in Northern Ireland, in Southern England, about who can and can't come into this country, same in the US. So is that, I mean, you're a big abundance guy. We've talked about land before, but I don't see any way of any tech that's going to enable Switzerland to, I don't know, make its population 100 million or 15 million. So there's more and more scarcity when it comes to land and population, and more abundance in other areas, maybe in space.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, look, have you ever gone on a train from Geneva to Zurich? If you have, or if you haven't, I'll tell you, there's almost only open space. It isn't like there's cities everywhere in Switzerland and there's no room.
It's well, there's a lot of mountains, but that's another issue.
There are mountains, and there's certainly places where not inhabitable, but there isn't a lack of space. It is a small country, like say Wales, geographically small. I personally don't think there's a genuine desire to stop people moving around the world. I think there is an absolute hatred of a refusal to integrate into the cultures that people come into. I think people want immigrants, but I think they want them to become British or American or German, not to attack locals for being infidels or whatever. I don't think they want to import into their countries the jihad, but they do want immigrants, and they're not against people of different color skin. I think actually Europe is one of the least racist places in the world, as is America. I don't think Americans are against Mexicans. They are against illegal immigrants. And there is quite a big distinction between being a racist and wanting to control the entry point into your country. That's kind of okay.
I wish that. So you're comfortable with this. That on the one, you're not bothered with the fact that Musk is very friendly and very supportive of this thuggish right-wing character, Tommy Robinson.
I don't consider Robinson right-wing. Actually,
what do you consider him?
I consider him to be a populist that agrees with and has become a focal point for ordinary working class people in the UK who are sick of being treated as second-class citizens. In the face of 2 decades of favoring minorities, they feel like they're the minority now. That isn't wrong.
Yeah, I'm not. Well, you, as I said, you put your political cards on the table. Coming to Europe, you have a couple of interesting pieces. One from Frank Fukuyama, old friend of Keen on America. He has a liberal vision of Europe. You're in some way sympathetic with what Fukuyama is saying, this liberal vision of Europe, and in some ways you don't think he really understands the challenge of Europe. You also have a piece on Europe 2031 about from a group of European economists, technologists, about what getting AI wrong means for us. So what's your interpretation both of the Fukuyama piece and Europe 2031? You've said that there are too many migrants in in Europe, and they're not willing to become white working class Englishmen like yourself.
No, I don't think that. I never said there's too many migrants. I said there isn't enough integration.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure what they're integrating into. But anyway, coming into Fukuyama, what's he saying?
Fukuyama is trying to be optimistic about Europe's future. The Europe 2031 piece, which is very well researched, is doing the opposite. It's warning about the bad outcome unless Europe wakes up to the opportunity that AI gives it. So that in a way, they're contrasting pieces. Fukuyama's is hopeful and kind of ignores some of the structural reasons why Europe can't become liberal, a modern liberal democracy. The main one being the top-heavy bureaucratism around the EU, which creates regulatory regimes that override countries, and you end up with dislike of the EU pretty much in every country in Europe, even in France, which was the architect of European Union. So I think Fukuyama is really is in the middle of, but not really solving for, how do you get a modern liberal Europe? Very similar to the US, by the way. I mean, the rise of populism as a reaction to the previous 20 years puts the US in a position where it's very hard to think of a liberal US. So I don't think they're actually all that different. I think populism is the price you pay for bad policy earlier.
Well, again, in the context of the Musk SpaceX IPO, clearly a remarkable achievement, company innovation. Meanwhile, government continues both in Europe and the United States to be in one kind of crisis or another. He talked about Fukuyama's concern with the failure of liberalism in Europe. There's an interesting piece in the Washington Post that you linked to by Fareed Zakaria, the CNN personality, about how California became a case study in failed government, which is particularly striking since you and I are talking here. Of course, it's the heart of Silicon Valley is part of California. I had Jonathan Weber on the show this week. He has a new book out about San Francisco, City on the Edge, Technology, Politics, and the Fight for the Soul of San Francisco. And Weber also talks about the historic dysfunctionality of city government. So it's state government, city government. Zakaria and Weber are talking about, again, it's coming back to our old friend at the New York Times' stark juxtaposition. On the one hand, remarkable innovation when it comes to technology and business in California, although of course SpaceX isn't a Californian business. And then the failure of government to keep up or even compete in any way. And something weird's going on, isn't it, Q?
Yeah, look, I think government in the US is pretty separated from the people. I think the concept of a primary and a party political path to being elected means that you have a kind of a professional political layer, very thin, but very powerful, that ends up electing their chosen people. And this is in both parties. And so the US is only a democracy in a literal sense, but in a real people controlling their representative sense, it really isn't. And that leads to corruption and separation, and also a kind of a lack of accountability on getting anything done. And it's only when citizens rise up, like say Gary Tan organized an Asian American reaction against the education system in San Francisco, and was listened to because the people actually spoke and became powerful. They tried to end math, for example, in schools, and they fought against that.
Oh, that's the end of civilization, isn't it?
Certainly wouldn't be good to end math.
Although I think AI does math now. So that's how you end your editorial this week. You say planning beats complaint. So you also talk about an interesting editorial by John O'Farrell, former general partner at Andreessen Horowitz. He resigned in protest in some ways from that big VC firm. He has an op-ed in the New York Times. We can't let my former venture capital colleagues buy off democracy. So he's against this overinvestment, shall we say, by wealthy venture capitalists or Musk in politics. What are we supposed to do, Keith? Where's the answer?
Yeah. So that piece, I mean, I don't actually blame Andreessen for spending money on trying to capture politics.
Because, regulatory capture, as it's said.
But in the American system, you almost have no choice. Now, it's kind of interesting. Bernie Sanders this week doubled down on his idea of a sovereign wealth fund that would own 50% of the equity in all of the high growth AI companies. And honestly, I think it's the first time he has had an insight. And I said last week, 50% is not enough, but it's the right direction. He has an insight which could literally give every citizen ownership in a sovereign wealth fund. I mean, literally ownership, shares. And the sovereign wealth fund could, be the main beneficiary of economic growth fueled by AI. And everyone could be uplifted through it. And that probably is a bottoms-up distributed politics driven by economics that leads to real participation.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, rather than complaining about Musk and all the inequality, I think you're right. And then let's give credit to Bernie Sanders. He's not just complaining; he's actually thinking about reform. Elizabeth Warren as well. Many people on the left. I think that perhaps what the group that's missing are centrist Democrats.
Well, actually, David Sachs on the All In podcast agreed with Bernie and said it should be 75%. And Sachs is considered right wing. So I actually think these right-left labels don't help us understand things. It's really about the path that money created through capitalism finds its way to raise up everybody. And if David Sachs and Bernie Sanders can agree, then everyone can agree.
Well, that's going to be good for civilization. If Bernie Sanders and David Sachs can agree on anything, Keith, are you still hopeful about civilization, or is it going to get swept away by all those angry Muslims on the streets of England?
I'm not against Muslims, Andrew. I'm against Islamicists. And Islamicism is a specific, it's like a extreme right-wing white supremacist within the Christian sphere. I'm against them as well, but I'm not against Christianity. So just let's be clear what I'm exactly saying.
Well, that is clear. That was an interesting week week of Elon Musk becoming a trillionaire. We will, I'm sure, come back to this subject. I'm away next week, so we'll probably recongregate in a couple of weeks. Have a good couple of weeks, Keith.
You're away.
Yeah, but I'll be back, Keith. Don't worry.
Thank you, everyone.